While Doc Brown didn't need roads for his travels in Back to the Future, they are an absolute necessity for Russia to carry out its assaults in Ukraine. Without these roads, Russia is unable to bring the complete power of its mechanized forces to bear on Pokrovsk, making the capture of this crucial logistical center all the more difficult. Ukraine is keenly aware of the importance of the roads surrounding Pokrovsk. It is actively ensuring that these routes become death traps for Russian units. Near Pokrovsk, the Russian army is being systematically destroyed on Ukraine's roads of death. Surviving the journey is impossible, as Ukraine has turned traversing these roads into a suicidal mission. This is according to Euromaidan Press, which on October 14th reported that Ukraine has elevated its roads of death strategy, a tactic that has proven successful multiple times in the past, to a new level near Pokrovsk. The outlet reports that Ukraine is holding nothing back, dispatching its elite drone units to monitor the roads leading into and around Pokrovsk. These drones are on a constant patrol, searching for any vehicle bearing Russian markings. When they locate their targets, the drones eliminate them, all part of a larger effort to paralyze Russia's logistical network and ensure any future assaults on Pokrovsk are significantly weaker than they otherwise would be. This is not a direct assault by Ukraine. It is the tactical weakening of a Russian force at Pokrovsk that numbered 110,000 troops at the start of summer and has been steadily eroding ever since. It is because these drones have established what soldiers are calling the roads of death that Russia's most recent offensives on Pokrovsk have failed so spectacularly. In many instances, these offensives crumble before they have a chance to properly start, compelling Putin and his generals to completely rethink how Russia might take a city that Ukraine is defending so effectively. Precision is at the core of Ukraine's strategy, Euromaidan Press reports. Total accuracy is crucial when attempting to make the roads around Pokrovsk non-operational from a Russian supply perspective. The outlet mentions several geolocated videos that showcase the effectiveness of Ukraine's methods, including one where a Russian UAZ van bursts into flames after being hit by a Ukrainian drone on one of the roads of death. To demonstrate just how precise Ukraine is with its latest defensive strategy, the drone didn't strike the van's engine or hit it from the side. Instead, Ukraine flew the unmanned aerial vehicle directly into the van's open window, detonating its payload only after it was inside. One can only imagine the grim fate of the Russian occupants. In another case, a Ukrainian drone spotted a Russian T-80 tank attempting to travel along another road near Pokrovsk. Euromaidan Press notes that, hilariously, the tank was trying to move stealthily to provide fire support for an ongoing Russian attack. Given that this is a 93,200-pound tank measuring nearly 32.5 feet long and 11.15 feet wide, being covert is a difficult task. The tank would have been easily detected by Ukraine's fleet of patrolling drones. Once spotted, it became another destroyed tank for Ukraine to add to the more than 11,200 it has sent to the scrap heap since Putin began his invasion. Russia has made some attempts to give its T-80s protection from Ukraine's drones, as Euromaidan Press points out. The tank was protected by additional cages and electronic warfare, yet it was still easily hit, the outlet states. The mention of cages is noteworthy. Cages are not standard features for tanks, primarily because the tank itself is designed to be a mobile fortress of armor and firepower, capable of withstanding a few hits. Nevertheless, Russia has been fitting its tanks with cages throughout the war in a desperate bid to counter Ukrainian drones. These contraptions are known as cope cages, and they aren't always effective. Russia has devised all kinds of strange and creative designs for them. In August, Business Insider shared some examples, including a monster tank loaded with so much extra hardware that it took 60 of Ukraine's first-person view, or FPV, drones to finally neutralize it. That was an unusual instance of a Russian cope cage success, likely possible only because Russian forces had an abundance of spare materials. But can it truly be called a success? The tank was hit by 60 drones, which implies it was incapable of any evasive action. This was thanks to the massive cope cage built around it, demonstrating that Russia is so desperate to protect its tanks that it is rendering them practically immobile. Other cope cage versions are more primitive than the one highlighted by Business Insider. Russia has used a variety of materials from metal cages and netting to wood and chains, all in an attempt to create makeshift armor to shield its tanks from Ukrainian drones. This extra armor does occasionally make it more difficult for Ukrainian drone operators to identify weak spots, but almost always the cope cages fail, and the Russian armor is destroyed. We don't know the design of the cope cage on the T-80 on the road of death, but it's irrelevant. Ukraine destroyed it regardless. Tanks are not the only casualties on Ukraine's roads of death. Ukrainian drone operators are not selective when it comes to eliminating Russian vehicles, as everything they encounter is being used to support the logistical needs of soldiers attacking Pokrovsk. According to Euromaidan Press, Russia is using all manner of supply vehicles. Vans, pickups, motorcycles, and even lone riders trying to deliver small batches of ammunition or rations to the front are being targeted and destroyed by Ukraine. The very use of these vehicles highlights the dire state of Russia's mechanized forces at this moment. Having lost a vast number of tanks and armored vehicles, Russia is now forced to depend on vehicles never intended for combat. Former Forbes correspondent David Axe wrote about the growing scale of Russia's reliance on civilian vehicles back in March. He noted that Russia faced a significant problem as it launched an increasing number of assaults on Ukrainian defenses in 2023 and 2024. More assaults resulted in more equipment losses, leading to the 11,200 destroyed tanks mentioned earlier. Axe also referenced a February survey which claimed that civilian vehicles, including cars, ATVs, and even golf carts, made up about 70% of all Russian vehicle losses that month. The situation has only deteriorated for Russia since then. Its shortfalls in tanks and armored vehicles are so severe that more civilian vehicles are being used in Ukraine than ever. Russia's rationale appears to be that it can at least use these vehicles for transporting supplies, thus not having to risk its precious armor. However, this logic is easily refuted by the fact that civilian vehicles have zero defense against Ukrainian drones that have already proven they can destroy tanks. By May, writing for his trench art column, Axe was claiming that 90% of the hundreds of vehicles Russia loses monthly in Ukraine are civilian models. This isn't some clever Russian tactic to preserve tanks and armored vehicles. It's a move of desperation that reveals just how deficient Russia is in armor as we near the end of the war's fourth year. As for motorcycles, Russia has a slightly better reason for using them. CNN reported in April that Russia believes the speed and agility of bikes give them an advantage in evading Ukrainian drones. This ignores the completely unprotected rider, who is finished if a drone scores a hit. Russia is so confident in its motorbike strategy that it has released propaganda videos showing soldiers practicing assaults in groups of 2 or 3 bikes. Just like the other civilian vehicles and the cope cages, the motorbikes are not working. The moment they attempt to travel on any of Ukraine's roads of death, they are eliminated by the very drones they are supposed to be able to evade. The outcome of Russia's attempted strategies in Pokrovsk is that the roads of death are now strewn with the wreckage of vehicles of all shapes and sizes. Drone operators relentlessly hunt down any movement, as confirmed by footage from both sides, showing the aftermath of the Ukrainian strikes. Twisted metal, burning wrecks, and craters every few meters. Euromaidan Press reports. What's most astonishing about this is that Russia should have learned this lesson multiple times already. Ukraine's strategy of creating impenetrable roads of death with drones is hardly a new tactic. It has done the exact same thing several times before. Consider Kursk, for instance. In August 2024, Ukraine executed a successful counter-invasion of that Russian oblast, seizing several hundred square miles of territory right from under Putin's nose. By October of that year, Russia had finally organized a counteroffensive against the Ukrainians in Kursk. In reaction to that counteroffensive, Ukraine deployed its roads of death strategy. Militarny provided a look at one of these roads in October 2024. Still, one might argue that Russian soldiers in Pokrovsk were unaware of these highways of death. Kursk is hundreds of miles from Pokrovsk, so perhaps the current situation is a result of poor communication, rather than Russia repeating mistakes that have already cost it scores of vehicles. That argument could be made, except for the fact that Ukraine has used the roads of death strategy near Pokrovsk before. Euromaidan Press confirms this, pointing out that these new roads of death are a mirror of those Ukraine established on Pokrovsk's western flank just a few months ago. Footage of the previous Pokrovsk Road of Death was shared on YouTube in July. The road, a stretch of about 5 miles connecting the settlements of Zhovte, Novopustinka, and Pustnica near Pokrovsk, had become another death trap for Russian vehicles. Over 140 destroyed tanks, armored vehicles, and civilian vehicles were visible on that road. That equates to 28.5 vehicles per mile, the kind of traffic jam no Russian soldier wants to be a part of. Even then, the vehicles Russia was sending down this road of death were mostly civilian cars and trucks supporting its supply network. Russia has learned nothing from its past encounters with Ukraine's roads of death. Or, more likely, Russian commanders are probably aware of how deadly these roads are but either don't care or are so desperate to maintain supply lines that they order their troops to drive on them anyway. In either case, the result is identical. Vehicles are being eliminated by the dozen, often long before they reach the frontline soldiers they are meant to be supplying. Having seen the success of its roads of death strategy, Ukraine is now looking to expand on its achievements near Pokrovsk. According to Euromaidan Press, one way it's doing this is by ensuring that Commander Robert Brovdy, callsign Magyar, continues to supervise the Pokrovsk sector. Brovdy, a businessman and entrepreneur before Putin's invasion, volunteered for the Territorial Defense Forces of Ukraine on February 7, 2022. Just a couple of weeks later, Russian forces invaded, and Brovdy has been fighting them ever since. Brovdy has been celebrated as one of the architects of Ukraine's drone-focused defense against Russia, to the extent that President Volodymyr Zelensky has awarded him one of the nation's highest military honors for his service. Brovdy has been celebrated as one of the architects of Ukraine's drone-focused defense against Russia, to the extent that President Volodymyr Zelensky has awarded him one of the nation's highest military honors for his service. He now commands the unmanned systems branch of the armed forces of Ukraine, and his presence in Pokrovsk largely explains how Ukraine has so successfully executed its roads of death strategy. Brovdy's understanding of drones is as good as or better than nearly anyone else. His doctrine is simple: total drone dominance stretching over a dozen kilometers behind the front line. With every meter of road under observation, every vehicle tracked, and every movement punished immediately, Euromaidan Press says of Brovdy. The Ukrainian defenders in Pokrovsk will be glad to have him, and even happier that it appears Brovdy will be remaining in Pokrovsk for the time being. Russia is being compelled to do something it has already had to do several times in Pokrovsk: reconsider its strategy. With the roads of death proving so effective, Russia cannot use the same tactics it employed just months ago. Large-scale mechanized assaults are nearly impossible. Russia can move its tanks and armored vehicles to assault staging points because they must navigate a sea of drones to get there. Motorbikes, which Russia thought could be an answer to Ukraine's drone-heavy defense, have also proven to be extremely vulnerable. Confronted with these challenges, Euromaidan Press reports that Russia has had to scale back its assaults to the point of sending tiny fire teams, often of 3 soldiers or fewer, to infiltrate Ukrainian defensive positions. RBC Ukraine also reported on this tactical shift in early September. It stated that Russia had deployed several Marine units to Pokrovsk to execute what it hoped would be a decisive breakthrough. The issue is that breakthroughs cannot happen, or at least cannot be sustained, without armored fire support. That armor is unavailable because of Ukraine's roads of death. Consequently, Russia is relying on the small groups previously mentioned. A report from the 7th Army Corps of the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine details what Russia is now attempting, since its mechanized assaults have been nullified. The enemy's main goal in Pokrovsk, to get as close as possible to the positions of drone operators or mortar crews, to try to disperse our defense forces, gain a foothold in new positions, and also expand the boundaries of the gray zone, the 7th Army Corps explained in a Facebook post. Some might call this a clever tactical adjustment by Russia. Instead of sending vehicles into the kill zone, it's sending infiltrators to get behind Ukrainian lines to target the drone operators who stop those vehicles. However, Brovdy sees precisely what Russia is attempting, and he is already organizing countermeasures to this new strategy. With the roads of death established, Euromaidan press says, Pravda is now directing Ukraine's drones to prioritize Russian infantry over its vehicles. Drone operators in Pokrovsk now have minimum monthly kill quotas, which, according to Euromaidan press, need to exceed Russia's capacity to mobilize new soldiers to the Pokrovsk front. We might be witnessing the beginning of a cyclical strategy. Currently, Pravda and his forces are targeting Russian infantry as they pose the most immediate threat to Pokrovsk. Vehicles are less of a threat now that Russia has finally realized the roads of death are not worth the risk. Eventually, Russia may notice that Ukraine is targeting its soldiers instead of its vehicles, which could lead it to try the roads of death again. Pravda will be watching for this. The moment Russia starts to build up for a mechanized assault or tries to get its supply networks running again, it's likely that Pokrovsk's drone operators will pivot back to hitting vehicles. It is a game of action and reaction. Judging by the sheer number of soldiers and vehicles Russia is losing in Pokrovsk, it appears to be a game that Ukraine is winning. Ukraine's roads of death are preventing Putin from capturing Pokrovsk this fall, putting Russia significantly behind its leader's timeline. Pokrovsk was supposed to be under Russian control by summer's end. Now Putin's desperation is mounting. According to Zelensky, Russia is now attempting a stronger push against Pokrovsk to compensate for the military losses it has suffered in Dobropilya. On October 9th, Pravda reported Zelensky stating, "They initially said by September, then postponed the deadline to November." This comment was in reference to Putin's deadline for seizing Ukraine's Donbass region. This operation has definitely influenced the defense of Pokrovsk. Realizing their heavy losses near Dobropilya, the Russians have now been ordered to take Pokrovsk urgently, at any cost. We know what "at any cost" means to Putin. Russia will be sending more soldiers, and likely more vehicles, into Pokrovsk. The effectiveness of these new offensives is anyone's guess. The roads of death remain very much active, poised to crush any new Russian offensive, just as they crushed everything Russia has attempted since the failed summer campaign to take Pokrovsk. Still, Putin won't be concerned about how many soldiers he loses as long as Pokrovsk is eventually taken. After all, he is perfectly content to let Russian soldiers die in Sumy, so why not in Pokrovsk as well? Putin has left his own troops in Sumy to perish in Ukraine's kill zone. Learn more in our next video, and don't forget to subscribe to Warzone Party for further updates on the situation in the Pokrovsk direction.